Greetings, dear listeners. This is Jonah Goldberg, host of the Remnant Podcast, brought to you by the Dispatch and Dispatch Media. Got a great guest for us today. My friend, he's a staff writer at The Atlantic. He wrote a fantastic book about the Islamic State called The Way of the Strangers. Some of you may remember the cover story he did about ISIS that I assume was the foundation of that book. Graeme Wood has got he's got a great article in The Atlantic called "The Neighbor from Hell." Graeme, welcome back to the Remnant. So, what is who and what is the neighbor from hell?
The neighbor from hell is the Islamic Republic of Iran, which has had this strategy that it does not keep to itself. It has that in common with with a bunch of other countries, but the strategies that it's pursued to do that have been incredibly destructive in the region. So the story that I wrote is about that strategy. The first strategy that it pursued was not the axis of resistance that it's had for most of the last 20, 25 years, but actually invading another country, invading Iraq in the Iran-Iraq War. That worked out very, very badly. The Iran-Iraq War was a miserable failure for both countries, and was replaced by, they tried to find another way that they could be projecting their power. And what they found was not to send a great big army out, but to cultivate proxies all over the region. And that's what made Iran a neighbor from hell. It was looking anywhere it could find them for sympathetic groups that it could arm, that had usually something in common ideologically, possibly religiously, and to use those groups to fight overseas so they didn't have to fight at home. They called it forward defense. And pretty much any country you look at in the Middle East has been affected by this, because Iran has been very, very canny in choosing where to cultivate those allies, and then eventually having them grow together into a whole axis, the axis of resistance, so they work together in concert. And that has worked pretty well for most of the last 25 years, and then up until last year when the axis was finally broken.
Yeah, so just for the lay listener, we're talking, the axis is Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthis, right, who are still around,
Yep.
Although the cabinet isn't it. And similar groups that are sort of the attack dogs for Iran. So I feel like I should have this more present of mind, but the war aims of the Iran-Iraq War were what? Was it the complete conquest? Was it just grabbing a big bite? Was it unification with sort of irredentist or whatever you call them, Shiites? And like, what is the continuity between? Because you said it was like, okay, they gave up on that and they went for this other thing. What is the ideological or theological continuity between the axis of resistance and the Iran-Iraq War?
Yeah, so it is easy to forget how it started and what it was all for, because it was so long, it was so insanely brutal.
Yeah.
That like by the end, it just looked like a different thing from how it started. So the thing to remember is, in 1979, the Islamic Revolution happens in Iran, and Iran is very busy. The clerics who take over have no idea how to run the country. They start oppressing internally, and Saddam Hussein is the one who starts the Iran-Iraq War by just taking a little bit of land, a little nibble of Iran that he thought he could get away with taking because they were so busy with internal squabbles. So Iran fights back. Iran takes that territory back, and then decides, all right, we're going for the whole tamale. We want to go into Iraq, into the Shiite heartland of Iraq, and take the two major holy cities of Iraq, which are Najaf and Karbala. There's also Samarra, somewhat further north. But they think, all right, we're not going to just let Saddam Hussein, who's a Sunni, fairly secular at that point, tyrant, control these territories. We're gonna grow, and it's gonna be big. So they just sent people into war with human wave attacks, and that war was really nuts. I mean, I looked back.
So like World War I with child soldiers, right? I mean, it was really gross. Yeah.
And also, just like with World War One, there were gas attacks. There's also just weird stuff. Like I met people who had waded into marshes on Iraqi territory, and then who had seen people just fried with electrical cables, so they would electrocute them in the water as a mode of war. So the all of which means it began as a territorial dispute and then became a religious one, where the Ayatollah Khomeini said, we want to take these holy places, and it's unacceptable for us that a Sunni tyrant would have control of them. Now that so it sort of transformed into a religious thing, and the axis of resistance has always partially been that, but not entirely. So if you look at you listed some of those members of the axis of resistance, the Houthis, Hezbollah, Bashar al-Assad was one of them. Of those, it's only Hezbollah that is religiously in basically perfect sync with Iran. The Houthis have this kind of weird version of Shiism that's basically not the same. It's almost in some ways closer to Sunnism than it is to Shiism. So they've had friendships that transcended those religious goals, but they all kind of were supposed to work in parallel, so that the brain center of all this in Iran, that its interests were served.
And so just can you run me through just sort of how much damage Israel has actually done to the axis of resistance and to the Iranian regime? I mean, it doesn't feel like Iran is on the precipice of regime change or anything like that, but like Hezbollah is a mess and Hamas is hanging in there, but it's not what it was. I mean, what is if you're keeping score, how would you keep score?
Israel has scored a number of huge victories, and Iran has scored some significant ones in return, but nothing nothing that touches what Israel has done. So let's start with what Israel did to Hezbollah. So Hezbollah was sort of the first of these proxies. It's the one that was most successful, and that was Iran's principal way of doing a couple things. First one is deterring and punishing the United States and Israel. So Hezbollah pointing a bunch of rockets at Israel and saying, if you do something we don't like, we can do something back to you, and it is something that will really hurt. So they can moderate that. They can do more or less of that. And Hezbollah was going to be the entity that could always be there and not be destroyed. Israel, of course, with the whole the beeper operation, where it created a fake beeper company, sold beepers to Hezbollah, packed those beepers with high explosives, and made them go off in Hezbollah operatives' pockets. So that was the first big salvo in the operation to neutralize Hezbollah. So they did that. They also showed that they were willing to attack the Houthis, who were less. Let's see, the Houthis could absorb blows a bit better than Hezbollah was, but Israel showed that they were willing to do that. And then the last thing that was vital here was Iran. Iran had made this whole axis with one goal in mind, which is being able to fight somewhere else and not be hit at home. So they started to hit Iran at home and not get a response from any of the other members of the Axis that would cause Israel to say, all right, the price of this is too great. Iran fired a whole bunch of ballistic missiles back, sent drones toward Israel, and none of it was the type of attack that was, calamitous, apocalyptic, or existentially threatening toward Israel. So the Axis had all been put together, and then little by little it was taken apart, so that the very place that was all coming from, that brain center in Iran, could be touched by Israel, was hit by Israel, and hit hard enough that Iran essentially had to say, please stop. We want to sit the rest of this round out. Now, the last thing I'll mention, though, is what Iran scored in return. What Iran scored in return was, by sending ballistic missiles toward Israel, they showed that they could get a lot through the Israeli defense system and deplete the Israeli anti-missile system. So that's an ongoing threat that Iran has. What Iran doesn't have anymore is this whole network of tiny groups, somewhat less tiny groups, that were, as of 2 or 3 years ago, thought to be willing to act in sync all at
Right.
once, rise up, hit Israel. They don't have that anymore. And that means they don't have an axis anymore. And that means that Israel, after a long time where the United States and Israel both thought that this was, that they were in grave danger from the axis, they no longer have the access to use as a threat, as a mode of deterrence and punishment for Israel and the United States.
Now, one thing you didn't mention in your damage assessment was, but it's in the article, and I know you have thoughts about it, is the Iranian nuclear program.
Yeah.
I am agnostic on what, like, I literally just don't know the extent of the damage, right? Do you have, I mean, if you had to guess the not the success, because I mean, like, of the hitting the target success is manifest, right? They did it. The question is, what was the damage? How much did they set back the program? Do you have any? You have to have a more educated guess than I do.
Yeah, I mean, there's some there's a few different ways you could think about this. First of all, the type of program that they were working on, basically enriching uranium. Once you've got the uranium, turning it into a weapon is relatively easy. They had been doing a lot of enrichment, so they had some. Was it possible to sneak it out of those nuclear sites before they were hit? Possibly. I mean, it doesn't take that much. It takes trucks. It doesn't take. Now it takes trucks that nobody's watching. It takes trucks that whose destination is not through some compromised intelligence knowable to the United States or Israel. So is it possible they made it out of there with some of that beforehand? I would say yes. Now, how much does it take to create a secret facility that nobody knows about? That's another interesting one, because it matters, like, how much power does the facility need? How much space does it need? And the power draw of an enrichment facility, I am told by experts, is roughly that of maybe a Costco or two.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not insignificant. It's not something, though, that is impossible to hide in a country of 90 million people. So right. I think it's perfectly possible that there could be facilities that are unknown. It could be possible that there was material that they were able to sneak out before the strikes. And it's also possible that those strikes were in fact devastating to the program.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you're right. I mean, of course, if the Islamic Republic tested a nuclear weapon, successfely got a big boom in the desert, that would change things a lot. But I think it's also important to notice that there are some things that would change in ways that were unfavorable to Iran. Obviously, they would enjoy having the ability to threaten people with nuclear weapons. They also would no longer have the ability to negotiate so that they don't get nuclear weapons.
Right.
They have really milked the possibility of going to the United States and saying, and to Europe and to the rest of the world, and saying, we're the nuclear weapon, we're 10 feet away from it right now, and we're creeping a little closer. Oh, now we're 5 feet away. Now we're 2.5 feet away. And then, in a kind of Zeno's paradox way, every time getting halfway closer, never quite getting there, and every time trying to get a little bit more in return for not closing that last bit of distance. They wouldn't be able to do that anymore. So I can see why that there might be reasons for them to avoid actually getting to the target if they think negotiation might go their way.
So one of the things, I mean, again, a lot of this is just from sort of reading between the lines or the stray quote from X official or Y official. But one of the things that seemed to bother some of Iran's official leadership was when the 12-day war was ongoing Hezbollah was like, yeah, you're on your own because you didn't come and get our back when they blew our balls off. I mean, to be crude about it, but so like how there are a lot of different ways I can go with this. So first of all, like, what is the future of Hezbollah? But second, that sort of underscores that, as you said, Hezbollah was the most theologically simpatico with the Iranian regime, and yet they were seeing it through a transactional lens to a certain point. This alliance. How much of the axis of resistance are true believers? I mean, I believe that they all believe Israel should be destroyed, but like, is there is the ideological commitment more important than the sort of like we need another duffel bag full of cash aspect of it?
It probably matters a lot which member of the axis you're talking about, and even which person within the Islamic Republic you're talking about. There are definitely people who are. Let's just start with Iran. Iran is kind of like Cuba at this point, where there was a revolution that was full of ideological and religious vigor, and that is greatly depleted since then. I mean, there's just a lot of things that have happened in the last 45, 46 years to make someone get disillusioned with that. So it's interesting for me as someone who reported a lot on the Islamic State to compare these things, because in the Islamic State, there was absolutely vigorous belief in all of these crazy jihadist Salafi tenets. In Iran, I won't say there's none of that, but there's much, much less. There's much more pragmatism. And then in members of the axis of resistance, far and wide, it varies a lot. I mean, like in Hezbollah too is a very pragmatic organization that has believers in it, and they have wings that are ideological, and they have wings that are strictly military and practical. And then you look at groups like the Houthis. The Houthis, as I mentioned, are distinct from the Iranian, Lebanese, Iraqi 12er Shi'i groups. The Houthis, though, are led by these megalomaniacal religious fanatics who do actually seem to be in an apocalyptic mode from the start, and to really believe these things. I mean, there's often, especially among people who are skeptical of the idea of striking the Houthis, they'll point out they don't seem to mind it at all. They seem to kind of like it. They seem to like to be hit hard. But we're talking about people who are like delivering crazy and creative sermons to their people, saying, we are going to attack the United States and Israel. We are going to be the number one enemy of them. We're on our path to that, and it's there's clearly a what looks from the outside like an irrational true belief mindset there that doesn't exist elsewhere. In general, though, I would say the Axis is a very practical group, and I don't think you can get too far, unlike the Islamic State, in analyzing them just through the ideology.
And so, there are a lot of people. I may have said it more than a few times. Like, let me put it this way. There are countries where I think the distinction between the people and the regime is a really important one to make. And then there are other countries where less so. And the argument has been for a very, very long time in a lot of quarters that the Iranian people don't like the regime. The Iranian people really don't hate Israel that much, right? Lots of King Cyrus talk and all that kind of thing. What is your sense of that? Like, where, like, it seems like the average Gazan is actually more pro-Hamas than I would like them to be. But I've lost the ability to sort of gauge where the average Iranian is in terms of how they actually view their regime. And do you think caring about that much matters anymore?
Yeah, so I'm a little out of date on this too. The last time I was in Iran was over a decade ago,
Uh-huh.
but I did get to spend months there, and I was, I guess, I was chastened in my belief when I went in and for the first time in 2004 that Iran was actually very pro-American.
Mm-hmm.
That that is certainly the case in large parts of Iran, especially big cities. In Tehran, very easy to find people who are thrilled by the idea of the United States, of moving to the United States, having America be more like the United States. But I found lots of people in Iran who were very I guess their passion was expressed more in being pro regime than
Mm-hmm.
in being anti-American. But to say that Iran is just a bunch of Uncle Sam American flag waving people who are trying to be free is not quite right. There's enough supporters of the regime that um, it would be it would be difficult to rely on an upswelling of popular revolution to overturn the regime. But the most important part is it's just not a matter of popular revolution at this point. There is just so much power entrenched in the Revolutionary Guard Corps,
Right.
in the government in general, that, as we've seen, there's protests that happen a lot in Iran, and they never go anywhere. They never really come close to going anywhere, and the regime is right back in place.
Yeah.
Everybody who knows the regime will tell you the same thing, that they will fight to the last bullet, and they've become very good at dealing with you know woman life freedom style
Mm-hmm.
um, protests. So don't expect any kind of internal regime change anytime soon.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. I was just talking to somebody about who's done a lot of reporting on Venezuela, and they're because we're recording this on September 3rd in the morning. Um, the Trump administration has moved ships down there. They took out some alleged narco trafficking boat. Um, and it's funny how the way this person was describing Venezuela sounds a lot like Iran to me, insofar as it's really just not the head of the regime. The problem is that the sort of corporatist merger between the private sector and regime elements is so complete that the business interests and the political interests are really sort of two sides of the same coin. And like with the IRGC, I mean, they own a huge swath of the Iranian economy, right? I mean, just like normal business, like malls and stores and that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, and overseas too. I mean, the criminal actions by the smuggling, drug trade overseas. This is all stuff that the Iranian regime and the Revolutionary Guards Corps um, survives on.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that they would be knocked out of place when they're being enriched as they are would be, it's very difficult to imagine. I mean, the comparison of Venezuela is good. Cuba, I think, is the one that
Yeah.
I'm reaching more and more to.
Yeah.
I've been reporting it. I've reported in Havana recently, and look, the revolutionary spirit exists only in the form of lip service and graffiti at this point. Everybody knows that that revolution has run out of steam a long time ago. I mean, my colleague Jeffrey Goldberg, I remember when he visited Fidel Castro. Fidel Castro said, "Even we don't believe that communism works anymore." And yet, how long is it going to take before the Cuban regime falls? No, it just seems like it's just going to last forever in this decrepit state that nobody likes, but enough people who are powerful are enriched by, that it will hobble along for a really long time, absent some kind of outside force.
Yeah. I mean, that's sort of one of the funny things about having incorporated criminal elements into a regime or a political system is that criminal elements really have no problem extracting rents, enforcing enforcing loyalty, punishing people, right? I mean, it's much easier to convince a bunch of basically mobbed up people to defend the regime because it's their business model than to say we have to protect the revolution. But all right, so what next? Like, where do you think? Like, where do you think things are going? I mean, I should ask you what you think about the planned occupation of Gaza and the. I mean, it's a little far afield from your piece, but I mean, are you planning your 2029 vacation in Mara Gaza? Where do you see things going?
Yeah, I
Strategically.
mean, so let's talk about Iran before we
Sure.
get to Gaza. But as I say, I don't think the regime is changing, but that doesn't mean there aren't some opportunities ahead. So the Israel, the United States, all of the elements that might have in previous times considered giving the regime a nudge, seeing if it falls over. They don't want to do that. Netanyahu's been pretty clear about that. Trump is enough of a non-interventionist that he's hesitant to do that, which means the regime's going to go on with the status quo until there's some kind of shock to the system. Now, there is one shock to the system that we know is coming up, which is the death of the supreme leader. So Ali Khamenei, who's the supreme leader right now, he's like 86 years old, and that means he's not going to last that much longer. But we've been saying that for a while. So I think part of the calculation that's been made by these enemies of Iran is that there's going to be some kind of coin flip that happens just actuarially in the next few years. And rather than ourselves be responsible for destabilizing the regime to the point that it falls, it's going to have some kind of transformation. And it could be a positive one, could be a negative one. Although the downside risk is not that great because Iran already is a corrupt regime that is about as anti-American as it can get. So there's a chance that it could get a little better. So why not watch that? And then, if necessary, decide what happens next. And I still doubt that the United States or Israel will catalyze regime change, but they'll be watching for that. Now, what it could turn into is a military dictatorship. It could turn into some transformation from a nominally mullah-led regime to a much more openly IRGC regime. There's also the possibility that Khamenei's son, Mujtaba, would take over. That would be interesting. Mujtaba seems to he's a canny operator, and also I have reason to believe a true believer actually in ideologically in the regime. So that's where that could go.
Wasn't Khomeini kind of like the state school of graduated from the state school of theology kind of thing? Like he had to be sort of artificially promoted because he was not a particularly respected scholar of Shiite Islam.
Yeah, he's not a scholar at all. I mean, he had the position of, I believe he was what they call a Hujjat al-Islam, which is a rank below Ayatollah, when his predecessor, Khomeini, who actually was a scholar, he was a person someone approaches for advice about Islam, for legal judgments on important topics. Nobody approaches Ali Khamenei for that. That was not his role. He was, however, important in the revolution. So, like, he was actually doing things in the revolution and during the Iran-Iraq war days. So he, when he was elevated, it wasn't as if they were choosing the person who was understood to be the greatest of the jurists, who was supposed to be running the show ideologically. That's what it was supposed to be. And to this day, I mean, his status as Ayatollah is in name only, and his son really probably even about the same, in the sense that there are Ayatollahs people go to for advice, and he's not one of them.
Okay, so the regime is going to putter along. It might get some sort of IRGC style Al-Sisi kind of government of a strongman kind of thing. I could talk that round or square, about whether that would be preferable. Because it would probably just depend on the specific personality of the person, right? I mean, of who took over. That's the thing about personalist regimes, is they depend on the person. But so
and I would say that almost all the alternatives for how it might go, all of them that I can think of that are really plausible, do not get rid of some of the main things that have been the goals of this regime, namely anti-Israel, anti-United States, and a certain type of morality policing among the population of Iran itself, hijab in particular.
right,
That they're all those are non-negotiable, and they're understood as being existential and defining for the regime. If you get rid of those, then what are we doing here? Is the question that is obviously asked by everyone who watches that compromise made. So even if it's a military regime, those things stay in place.
feels very. I mean, just really feels strange that you think that, like, if you let women take off a headscarf, then that undermines the whole purpose and metaphysics of your regime. But to each their own.
But that really is. I mean,
Yeah.
that really is how they phrase it to themselves. I mean, when the headscarf protests were happening, partially under the kind of external leadership of Masih Alinejad, it wasn't because this was a Western preoccupation. It was because internally it's considered an issue so great that again, if you budge on it, it's as if saying maybe this whole thing was a mistake in the first place.
Yeah.
And if you say that, then there really is a chance of internal regime change. So they've never said that. They've instead said this part is not negotiable. We will we'll just tactically tack here and there, but in the end, no, we are going to be instituting Islamic morality within our borders forever, as long as the Islamic Republic exists.
So yeah, again, I used to make this comparison a lot. It's, again, probably was never original to me, that a lot of the regimes in the Middle East, they would use the Palestinians essentially sort of like, Sudeten Germans, right? Like, they're a useful prop to foment popular concern, to distract people from the problems of their own regimes, their own governments, their own bad economies, and that kind of stuff. A way to sort of also basically troll the Democratic West, because it ignites lots of stuff on the American left or the Western left. But every time I ever talk to anybody who, like, from there, and the attitude towards actual Palestinians is not all that rosy from from the Egyptian government, from the Saudi government. They like them as props, they like them as a political issue, but they don't necessarily don't want them in their country. And so by that light, you got to think that, like, the Saudis are pretty happy these days, right? Because they've seen the Iranians taken down more than a few pegs. They are not the foreboding counterweight to the Saudis that they seemed to be about 5 years ago. And the Palestinian plight, I'm sure there are people who are legitimately concerned about some of the suffering and all that, but at the same time, it's put Israel in a bad light, and the Saudis are just cutting deals with Trump. I mean, it really does seem like they've played their hand better than almost any other regime in the Middle East.
Yeah, the Saudis are in a very interesting position here. Needless to say, that they don't see eye to eye with the Iranians in general. Just historically, they've been religiously opposed to Shiism and vice versa, to their Wahhabism. There is and they've been thrilled to watch Hamas destroyed. So there's a lot of popular sympathy, of course, for Palestinians, but as a regime, the Saudis view Islamism as a threat, an existential threat. So having people enthusiastic about an Islamist government, which is what Hamas is and was, is really, really bad for MBS and for the Saudi monarchy. So they love to see Hamas destroyed. But they also know that there's enough people within their own borders who are sympathetic to that they don't want that issue to become the most salient in people's minds.
Right.
There's one other really important thing here, though, with the Saudis. So MBS, you may know about this city in the desert, in the sort of northwestern desert of Saudi Arabia called Neom. And MBS has spent huge, unbelievable amounts of money on this city. The reason you put it out there in the desert, though, in the northwest of Saudi Arabia, is because you think that area is going to be different in the future from how it was in the past. Not just because you put a city there, but because the borders are different, and specifically that Israel is involved in that city. Israel, Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia. And right now, the chances that Saudi Arabia makes peace with and has diplomatic relations with Israel, rather than just having these informal relations, pretty low. So that means the entire NEOM project is kind of on ice. And given how much they've spent on it and how much they have told the world about how much they're focused on it, I think that they must be pretty disappointed by that, by having the schedule for that pushed back 5, 10, who knows how many years.
Yeah, I mean, but so I think it was you who told me the last time you were on here that the Saudis don't do I can't remember the Majid, whatever the moral police guys who ride around on mopeds.
Correct. They're gone. Totally gone.
So, which I think is great news, right? I mean, like, it should make me happy. So, like, I'm happy about that. But,
wait until you get the whip hand, then you'll wish you had it. But yeah, you're right. They're totally gone, and the fact that they, they're trying to become a normal country, and being a normal country of the future means connected to other places, and essentially having their own version of Dubai on the other side of the country.
Yeah,
but they can't have that if it's just alone in a desert that nobody goes to, which is why having a war in Gaza for them and having Israel being like an untouchable entity that they can't partner with is frustrating and unfortunate.
So, just the last question before, because that's would be a good segue to talk about Israel. But is there any sign that you know of that there's any nostalgia for the Saudi Arabia that had the guys on mopeds speeding people up, or is the popular consensus sort of bought into this idea of Saudi Arabia 2.0, 21st century modern country thing? I mean, is it a popular idea with the average Saudi?
I would say it is. Yeah. My experience talking to Saudis is that they are, they were already leaving Saudi Arabia to indulge in things like movies and going to concerts. And that was part of MBS's calculation. You can just go to the airport and watch people going and ask them where they're going and why. And they'll tell you they're going to see a football game. They're going to see a Pitbull concert. Why not just have it locally?
Yeah.
And people are pretty excited by that. It was also really easy when I was traveling around Saudi in the early days of MBS's reign to find people who clearly did not want to be going to Pitbull concerts and were not thrilled about the idea that their daughters might want to and have the ability to within their borders. And then there were also a lot of people who had come to Saudi Arabia, like Egyptians, Palestinians in some cases, Syrians, who had fled secular regimes and had come to Saudi Arabia because they understood that there was a morality that was enforced along strict Sunni lines. Those people are not happy at all, but they also know that they, under the current regime, under MBS, if they pipe up and say something about that, then best case scenario, they're deported. Worst case scenario, that they're put in a secret prison. So they're the losers in this. But MBS has made the calculation that there's a small enough number of people who are upset about this that they can be cowed into submission while the country zooms forward into a cosmopolitan, basically secular future.
My heart bleeds for the Islamist post-liberal integralists of Saudi Arabia. Okay, so Israel. In the context of what you were writing about, or more broadly, what do you think it's up to? Like, what's the end? Like, this is I'm a supporter of Israel. I don't apologize for it. I'm skeptical about the occupation of Gaza, because I'm a supporter of Israel, right? I mean, because I think I still don't understand the end game, and I certainly don't buy. I assume you read the Washington Post exclusive about what this plan that's floating around about Gaza. The idea of giving a bunch of giving a million, 2 million Palestinians some cryptocurrency and say, get the hell out of here for 10 years while we turn this into a resort. Thank God those horrible nation-building neocons didn't win the Republican nomination in 2024. I mean, wow. I mean, like, thank God we have America Firsters here who are like humble and skeptical about big projects in the Middle East. So anyway, what the hell?
Yeah, with Israel, I've spent so long working on this Iran question that I've been impressed by the strategic clarity of Israel on that point. Looking externally, looking outside of its borders, the people who are thinking about what are our long-term threats from without have taken big gambles, and they really paid off. Like the idea that Israel would not be afraid of Hezbollah rockets for the foreseeable future was inconceivable a couple of years ago. That they wouldn't be afraid of Iran, also inconceivable.
Yeah.
So contrast that clarity of strategic vision with, like, what do we do about Gaza right here?
Mm-hmm.
What do we do about the West Bank, for that matter? I would say they're fumbling around, grasping at straws, and partly to their credit, trying to be creative about certain options that in the past have not worked out. I'll say a nice thing about Donald Trump. Donald Trump, as far as I can tell, one of the unifying characteristics of his reactions to foreign policy is, if something has not worked out in the past, then going to him with a version of the same proposal gets you nowhere. He's not interested. He's interested in a stupid new idea over a defective old one, and stupid new ideas are still stupid, but it is probably a good idea that people are thinking of crazy, stupid ideas rather than going back to the same things that have happened with dramatic failure in the past.
I think that's fair. I mean, I'll say something nice about Trump too. He does show you that the ossified sort of, well, you can't do that because it's the peace process, and the peace process is the process by which we'll get peace, and therefore, blah 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 blah, and like you get this path dependence that is completely sort of artificial, and for good or for ill, Trump blows up all that stuff, and I think that's sometimes literally, sometimes figuratively.
Yeah, and the idea that, why don't we just clear out Gaza by just, instead of fighting people, bribing them to leave? There's lots of reasons why that's a bad idea. Lots and lots of reasons. Now, it's also an idea that hasn't really been proposed by anyone who's in a position of authority in the way that it's being floated right now. Do I think that that's how it's going to go? I think probably not. But yeah, that it's probably good that there's also some creativity that's being exercised. I mean, from the Israelis' perspective, anyone with anything more than just a decade's historical memory will know that last time Gaza was occupied by Israel, it was such an unpleasant experience that Israel left. The Israeli right left, and there was an element that was upset by leaving, but in general, it was understood that this was a bad exercise, and we're not having fun yet, so let's go. So I have to assume the Israelis are looking for alternatives to that, which is kind of what um, the sort of null strategy is right now. That is, let's just take care of Hamas and then just start occupying the territory. They don't want to go down the same path that they were in before, but they're too, I would say, strategically impoverished in the way that they're thinking about Gaza to have come up with any alternative except for these pie in the sky operations.
Yeah, and in fairness, again, I lean against going into to occupying Gaza, but one of the reasons why occupying Gaza previously was so terrible was how entrenched Hamas was. So it's kind of like if the premise is going into Gaza after you uproot Hamas, it's a slightly different proposition. But it's sort of there's still question begging going on about whether it's possible to actually sufficiently uproot Hamas that doesn't make occupying Gaza a craptacular experience. It just seems to me that if you had told any Israeli, including a BB type, a year ago, 18 months ago, or on October 8th, right? Okay, here's what you're going to get. You're going to get the Trump administration bombing the crap out of the nuclear program. You are going to literally maim Hezbollah in a way that makes them ineffectual. And I mean, I'm curious whether you have an opinion on this, but there's talk about, I don't believe it, but there was talk about the Lebanese government actually disarming Hezbollah, which I always thought they couldn't possibly do. But anyway, we'll get to that in a second. You have Hamas just, decimated is always misused, but because it just technically means only 10%, but like really pulverized, including Yahya Sinwar, and you can go down this list, right? I mean, there's like these significant strategic victories. Kind of looks like a win to me, and like I just want to know what the limiting principle is. Because Israel's coming apart of the scenes economically and socially because they've been at such a tempo for so long. And so I just haven't seen. You can't do cost benefit analysis unless you know what the actual goal is, and I can't get a really clear answer to that.
Yeah, I mean, each step along the way has been a strategically important step. Getting Hezbollah. I was in Israel, October 9th, 2023. So we're talking a day and a half after the massacre, and I remember the concerns vividly. The ordinary people, of course, staggering around the street, stunned at what had just happened, but the people in responsibility, wondering what's happening in the north right now.
Mm-hmm.
Is Hezbollah joining the fight, and can we manage it if they are? And there was real doubt about that. That concern is gone.
Mm-hmm.
The concern that Iran is going to enter into the war, basically gone. So huge victories along the way, again, combined with opacity about what does this place ultimately look like when all is done. Is Gaza just part of Israel? Is the West Bank just part of Israel? Is annexation the end point here? And if so, what is that going to look like? There's certainly people who on the ideological far right who would just openly say, yeah, that's what we want to do.
Right.
But there's also a lot of grown-ups out there who know how difficult that would be, how immoral it would be if done in certain ways, and who don't want to do that as a result. And nobody has been able to say clearly what the end point is, which is, I think, it's both a source of frustration for Israelis, and yeah, it's a source of frustration for Israelis, and a source of real concern for again those people in positions of responsibility who do want the war to end. They want it to end with victory, but if you can't even say what the victory looks like, then how do you know whether you're getting there or whether you're just in a constant loop of seeing what happens next?
Um, so I have friends who will say that Bibi's keeping it going because he knows there's going to be, an accounting of how October 7th happened on his watch. I have friends who call that a vile blood libel and slander, and uh, kind of curious, where on that spectrum do you find yourself?
You mean how much vile blood slander am
Well,
I?
I mean, like
am I
some
open
people
to?
think it's profoundly unfair to Bibi Netanyahu. Bibi Netanyahu has been focusing on dealing with Iran for 20 years, right? It's been
Yeah.
his obsession forever. He has successfully done a lot vis-a-vis Iran, and to say that this is all just out of political expediency and that he's willing to sacrifice hostages to, Israeli hostages, in just to cling to power. If you don't believe the characterization of Bibi's motives, then it is kind of a slander, right? And on the other hand, there are other people who are like, look, he thinks he's the indispensable man. I mean, Churchill kind of felt that way about himself, and maybe it's not slander, it's just sort of like he's tunnel visioned and he thinks that he's got something to prove and he's the man of the hour. I just I I've met Bibi Netanyahu twice. Can't say we had a lengthy conversation of any kind. I have no great read on him because I just know too many people who have such divergent opinions about the guy.
So I would say first this: he's an extraordinary man in a number of different ways. In some ways, he's super normal in the sense. And I'm not talking about as a matter of personality, just in a matter of how he pursues his interests. He, just like any other human being, does not want to be held to account for things that it would be difficult or impossible for him to answer for. There's a couple such things. There are the possible criminal inquiries that he would have to face if he ever stepped down. There is also, though, as you suggest, there's inquiries about what happened on October 7th. And that doesn't mean that he welcomed it, that he knew it was going to happen, but he was the prime minister during the time when
Right.
Israel faced the most disastrous incursion into its territory since certainly since 1967, or excuse me, since its founding. So
Yeah.
this is I would not, if I were in his shoes, want to be standing before a commission of inquiry about that under any circumstances, and I would like to postpone that moment if I could. And I would also like to paper over the failings by racking up some wins. These are just totally normal
Right.
Human motivations that would apply to anyone, Bibi or otherwise. He also, I think, has a streak of he certainly has a no shortage of self-regard and possibly even some megalomania about him, where he thinks that he is the man of the hour and he needs to be in place to implement a political and strategic vision that nobody else has. And I'll say he's all those steps along the way that have brought Israel closer to safety. They are cumulatively, they're very impressive. So
Yeah.
He has to be given credit for that. I do think, though, that as a matter of how should I put it, honor. If you talk to people who were in charge in Israel around the time of October 7th, or at the moment of October 7th, there's a kind of soldier's honor that applies where they say, we screwed up.
Mm-hmm.
We left this country defenseless. And the first moment when it would be responsible for us to do so, we will take our lumps and resign, because that's what a soldier does. And the fact that Netanyahu at no point has simply stopped and said, I screwed up, I was in charge, and I will begin holding myself responsible by stepping aside for someone else to take power. That he has given every indication that he's just going to stay in power as long as he possibly can. Seems it doesn't look great compared to the honor that someone would have by saying what I can do for my own self-image is step aside and acknowledge my failings. He doesn't have that aspect to his personality, and so and every minute that he fails to do that, it I think it looks worse.
Yeah, I mean, there is a thing. I mean, I was talking about this the other day about Rudy Giuliani, where, you know, if someone proposed giving him the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2002, you'd say absolutely, that guy deserves it. In 2024, 2025, not so much. And it's sort of like that old thing about if Napoleon had been hit by a cannonball on the way towards Moscow, towards Russia, he would be remembered as one of Europe's greatest liberators, right? And the the idea for people, you have to have a massive ego and amount of self-confidence to be the prime minister of Israel, right? To be the leader of a country like that. You just have to have your head on a swivel, and you have to have confidence in your decisions, because that's what the job entails, right? And so only certain types of people are going to get it. And so it seems to me he doesn't want to be. I totally get it. As your point is well taken about him being a human being, and just doesn't want to be remembered for the worst thing that happened on his, in arguably in his lifetime, right? He'd rather be remembered for something positive in response, and I'm sure Chamberlain would have loved to have stayed in power and made amends for what happened. So I mean, I'm not saying Bibi's Chamberlain, but I think the human point is a very good one. And so I think you can credit some of the criticisms without saying that they're a slander or a libel, because he's not being cynical necessarily. He, I think, because of his high self-regard, really feels like he's got an obligation to stick around. And whether he's right or wrong, I think I'm going to leave to historians and people who follow this stuff more closely.
Yeah, I mean, I just think, again, to use that same word, honor, it is surprising to me, and I think to, as I said, others who were in positions of authority in Israel when October 7th happened, just stunning how they all knew they had to go.
Yeah.
And he doesn't even seem to suggest that he has that kind of impulse. I think, Jonah, you and I have talked about this example before. I lived in Japan for a bit, but there's this famous figure named General Nogi, who was one of the great end of the 19th, early 20th century Japanese generals, and who made certain missteps in battle that were costly. And he offered his life to the emperor, and he said, I would like permission to not just resign, but to kill myself out of dishonor. And the emperor was like, absolutely not. We need you. Like, okay, I mean, I can't countermand your telling me not to. So, and he did that a couple times, and then the emperor died, and then there's no one to tell him no anymore, and so he killed himself immediately. And you can still, in central Tokyo, go to the shrine of General Nogi and see his sword and pictures of him reading the newspaper on the day that he killed himself. I'm not asking for Bibi to kill himself, but there's an element of the General Nogi spirit where some form of resignation and repentance for failures that one has had in office that we should hope for in our leaders, not to the point of seppuku, but to the point of just saying, it was my fault and I'm going to step aside out of honor. If you want me back, you can ask, but I'm going to step aside. And that is just doesn't exist in the mind of Netanyahu, who believes, I'm sure, that his position in the history of Israel demands his own dishonor of staying around to fulfill that. But it's a characteristic that I think in a leader one should hope not to see.
All right, so this actually, I didn't plan on going here, but I'm kind of curious on your take as we close this out. So I'm kind of obsessive. I haven't written or talked about it in a while, but since the second Trump term has started, I've done it a lot. I'm a big believer in honor among nations, and that national honor is a thing, right? I think national honor is a different thing than nationalism. National honor has a lot of limiting principles. Nationalism doesn't. but you can see a connection between the two in terms of, there's some sinew that connects them. And so part of my objection to the way we've handled, say, Canada or Greenland, or more seriously, Ukraine, is that it has been fundamentally dishonorable. And part of my problem, I've been arguing now for coming up on a decade that Donald Trump is unfit for office because character is destiny and he has poor character. And it seems to me that one of the long-term problems that we're going to have in this country as a result of the Trump presidency is the elevation and celebration of, and in some ways maybe even the reification of dishonorable conduct being smart and sophisticated, right? That going back to, we'll take the oil, right? If we go to war in Iraq, right? Is this idea that everything should be reduced to a deal, that that everything is sort of zero sum and that we have to get a slice, that humiliating our allies is somehow just great negotiation tactics, that sort of crapping on the idea of like democratic alliances and being leader of the free world is for suckers. I can go down a long list, right? But like this idea, we never talk much about national honor in this country, but that doesn't mean we don't believe in it. And I worry about a global order where America no longer gives, or at least major political party that may be in power for a while, thinks that concepts like national honor are for suckers. Kind of curious what you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, we all know people who are very transactional in how they deal in their private or business lives. To see that attitude projected onto a national scale, it's pretty obvious to me that Trump sees that attitude as, if not a virtue, then just the only way to think, is sad. And I guess my biggest worry is that it's irreversible too. Once you see that one can behave this way, that a country can behave this way in a purely transactional way, to turn back into a country that will occasionally at some material cost to itself do things that are right. It just becomes harder to imagine that return. And yeah, I mean, there's a great line from Auden where he's described in The Shield of Achilles, where he says, a person who's never heard of a world where promises are kept or one might weep because another wept. That is the opposite. That view, that it's just unimaginable that one would do the right thing or feel sympathy. It is, when performed in public, pretty poisonous and hard to come back from. And that saddens me greatly.
On that cheery and upbeat note,
you can depend on me for a cheery and upbeat. Islamic State, no matter what it is, I can only see the upsides.
Well, actually, since I should have disclosed to our listeners, because I don't want to be accused of collaborating with the enemy. You are in fact of dual Canadian U.S. citizenship, or just
dual, yes.
Okay,
dual from birth. That's right.
So dual loyalty. Let's just put it that way. Enemy within, all that kind of stuff. How long is it going to be? How do you think it's irreparable, the relationship with Canada?
I spent some of the summer in Canada, saw relatives, spoke to friends. It has become it's become a national cause. Anti-Americanism has, in a way that I've never seen in the past. You go to the supermarket, and supermarkets will tag American goods so that you know, and so that you maybe enact your own boycott. And those friends and relatives of mine say they'll never come to the United States again. I don't know if it's true. I hope they do, but I do know that in a lot of social circles, if you even just say you're going to New York for the weekend on a holiday that would have been unremarkable in the past, then you'll get nasty looks and you'll have to deal with that and social shaming and so forth. So this is going to change things for, I think, a very long time.
Yeah.
It's again, like to be anxious about the United States, anti-American in a casual way in the past, totally normal, especially among certain sets in Canada. But to make it a matter of national honor, that Canada has to hate America and stay away from it. That's new. I think it's going to last a while.
Elbows up, or whatever they say. All right. Graeme Wood, thank you so much for doing it. The piece in The Atlantic is The Neighbor from Hell. And thanks again for coming on.
Always a pleasure, Jonah.